But first, a tale of two Prime Ministers. And let us start with Prime Minister Scott Morrison. Now, as I said yesterday, it is the cover-up that gets you every time, or in this case, the backside covering. A very unwise telephone call that Morrison made to the New South Wales Police Commissioner, his former neighbour. Now, the police are investigating why Angus Taylor, Morrison's Energy Minister, used a fake document, that's the one on the right, to falsely accuse the Sydney City Council of blowing nearly $16 million on travel interstate and overseas in just 1 year, which is actually an impossible amount when you think about it. The real document on the left shows the council spent just $2,000. Now, at that stage, Taylor should have just explained, said sorry, how did this document came to hand. He should have got that story out there and maybe sacked a few people. But he didn't, and now the New South Wales Police is investigating on Labor's request. Now, Morrison was yesterday under pressure to explain why he wouldn't make Taylor stand down. And so he called the New South Wales Police Commission to ask what was going on. Which, as I said yesterday, wouldn't you love that kind of access, you know? Hello, the Prime Minister here. What are you doing with my mate Angus? But the call wasn't sinister, the police chief said today.
And as a result of the phone call from the Prime Minister, the investigation continues, and New South Wales Police has acted openly and ethically in relation to our activities, which is entirely appropriate. The Prime Minister didn't ask me any questions that were inappropriate. He didn't ask for anything that was inappropriate, and I'm comfortable with the discussion that we had that ran over a few minutes.
And then he had to say there was nothing in the fact that the two men are former neighbours, as they once joked on 2GB.
But he was the Treasurer at the time, and he did tell me recently that he's the Prime Minister now, and really that should be Josh Frydenberg's job. But he won't take my calls, so anyway, no, he's a neighbour of mine.
Well, he's moved out. He's in Kirribilli now, so he's not collecting your bins anymore.
And I do wish him well. He was a very good neighbour.
Well, mate, that's what good neighbours do. That's what they do. Mick's a great bloke, and that's the Shire way.
How come you don't do it anymore?
Well, I don't take the bins out anymore.
Now, there's absolutely zero evidence that Scott Morrison asked this good bloke and former neighbour to do any favours. The former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, who Turnbull replaced, didn't hesitate to stick in the knife.
I'm sure the call that the Prime Minister made to the New South Wales Police Commissioner was innocuous, but it would have been much better had it not been made. You know, being blunt about it, it's a call that I would not have made.
And I have to say that Turnbull is right for all that Scott Morrison blustered in Parliament today.
Now, as I told the House 4 times yesterday I was going to talk to the New South Wales Police, I don't know who they thought I was going to call, Mr Speaker. Did they think I was going to call the parking infringements officer at the Sutherland Police Station? I spoke to the Police Commissioner because I needed to know to exercise my responsibilities, both to this House and under the ministerial standards, to exercise the assessment that is required of me on those matters.
And I'll say it again, I think it's probably all innocent, but here is the thing. How would any of us know that call was dumb? Now to another Prime Minister, well, a former Labor one, and something I have to say, considerably dumber. Former Labor Prime Minister Kevin Rudd. But of course, yesterday Kevin Rudd said that he had a great plan to defend Australia. You see, China's been very aggressive under its dictator Xi Jinping, and Rudd said we had to get stronger to defend ourselves without America's help. We couldn't trust them to be around forever, and the way to do that was to double our population.
Australia must also look to mid-century, when we may be increasingly faced with having to stand on our own 2 feet, with or without the support of a major external ally. Australia must plan for a big Australia. Only a country, in my judgment, with a population of 50 million later this century, would begin to have the capacity to fund independently the defence and intelligence assets necessary to defend our territorial integrity and maintain our political sovereignty for the long term.
Now, this is a very stupid plan for 2 big reasons. First, Kevin Rudd is saying that Australia with 25 million people needs America's help to defend itself from China with 1.4 billion people, and that is true. But then he says that with 50 million people, we still won't then need America's help. Well, I have to say that if China still has 1.4 billion people, we'll still need help, all right. That won't have changed. And then, of course, there's the amenity of doubling our population size in, just 30 years. You've got to be kidding. But one more thing. Where would we get another 25 million new Australians? Most, of course, would be immigrants, like now. And what that means is that to protect ourselves from China, we must import more Chinese. You see, China's already our second biggest source of immigrants after India. And this raises a question that almost nobody dares to even ask because it's too rude. Some people say racist. If there is a conflict with China, on what side would we find our Chinese Australians, who already number 1.2 million people? Now, without a doubt, most would be on Australia's side, no doubt. But then you also have to consider this. 1 in 3 migrants from China hasn't taken out Australian citizenship since 2012. Consider also this. On Communist China's National Day this year, police in the Victorian suburb of Box Hill raised the communist flag of China over their own police station, as some of the many local Chinese there sang the Chinese anthem. And that, of course, tells us two things. First, in this multicultural society of ours, there's a growing culture of self-hatred that doesn't inspire much loyalty, not to Australia. You just look at the number of councils who want Australia Day scrapped. Australia Day, our only national day that's probably left apart from Christmas Day that could possibly unite us, and they even hate Christmas Day. But also look at the hatred preached on the ABC, with an Aboriginal star, for instance, early this year, pretending to defecate on the image of a white woman.
Whitey! Shit! On your colonisation. Hurry up! Oh, f it. F it. Burn this place to the ground!
Now, when you get that kind of hate preaching, even on the national broadcasts, or hate preaching against Australia, look, that has to be dangerous. And why? Because immigrants can have conflicted or dual loyalties. You want them to make them more loyal to Australia, you present a shocking image, not good. Which brings me to recent findings of Professor Waning Sun of the University of Technology, Sydney. Professor Sun surveyed more than 800 Australia-based Mandarin-speaking social media users and found nearly 80%, 80, sided with China in the dispute over the South China Sea. And I'll tell you why that is not good. You see, that's the very issue, one of them, that could go bang. China broke international law to claim the South China Sea as its own, actually a sea which most of our sea trade comes through. It's then built military bases there and warns off US ships and planes.
Leave immediately and keep far off so as to avoid any misunderstanding.
Australia right now is under a lot of pressure to join American operations to militarily challenge China's sovereignty in that sea. But here we've got 80% nearly of Chinese Australians, the ones surveyed, on China's side. It's got to be a worry. What's 80% of the 1.2 million Chinese Australians we have? That works out to just short of a million people on the side of the communist dictatorship on this issue. Now, I'm certain that grossly exaggerates the danger. When the chips are down, I don't think anything like that will be on China's side. But I'd like Kevin Rudd, now to tell us what he thinks the real risk is, and to do that before we open our gates to double our population.